Aloha Church, back here with Dr. Joe Grana. And Joe Grana is an author, pastor, as I call him, pastor, theologian, pastor, or pastoral theologian, different titles for him. Sire, His Holiness, all the different titles, which he loves it when I say that. No, not really. But we're back here again, and Joe, thanks for joining us. I would love to hear your thoughts. I want to know exactly how the end of the world is going to happen. So you're the expert on this. Go ahead and tell us all.
Jesus is coming back. That's it. There you go. That's
that's it. Oh man, let me write that down.
Trumpet will blow. Do-do-do-do, and
so
all go home.
Jesus is coming back, and we all are going to be with it. All right, thank you for joining us. Just kidding.
Yeah. Bye, folks. Well, when it comes to the book of Revelation in particular, different views, one is called the Preterist view. Preterist view believes that everything was fulfilled by 70 AD. Most scholars believe Revelation is written in the 90s, but Preterist view would go a little before that, back to 70, and that had to do with the destruction of Jerusalem. They'll say everything that was written in Revelation was fulfilled during the time of Revelation. Okay? And nothing's prophecy. It's all of that time. And, you and I in the last few sessions have been talking about understanding things in this context and saying they spoke a word there. They just take it a step further, saying all that and saying, and this is it. There's nothing about the future at all. Okay? Then you have some millennial views. Now, the millennium is 1,000, and it comes from Revelation of the 1,000-year rule of Christ. And so there are different views of that particular one. Interestingly enough, postmillennial view was the prevalent view until the 1800s. Now, there were some of the other views that I'm going to talk about too, but this was the predominant one. And that is that there's going to be 1,000 years of peace on earth, and then Jesus is going to come back. Premillennial view is Jesus is going to come back and set up shop on earth, if you will, and have the 1,000-year rule. And we will rule along with him, even we who have passed before. In fact, there's a view that the dead in Christ will rise and will be a part of that ruling body with Jesus for 1,000 years. And then after that, there'll be Satan, he's tied up during that 1,000 years, and then he is loosed, and then all the end of times comes. And then there is what's called the amillennial view. When you put the a in front of something, it negates it. So a theist is one who believes in God, an atheist is one who doesn't believe in God. A Gnostic is somebody who knows, an agnostic is somebody who doesn't know. So a millennialist is one who believes in the literal millennial, and this is part of the issue of Revelation. Are the numbers literal, or are they symbolic? And so the pre- and post-millennial view will say, no, it's literal 1,000 years. Amillennial view would say, no, that's a symbolic number, and it's not meant to be taken literally. It's talking about the rule of Christ, yes, but in the amillennial view, he's ruling. And you say, well, how can he be ruling? How can Satan be loosed at the same time? And one of the images of this particular view is, it's kind of like if you had a mean dog, but you have it on a leash. And so it can, or like on a chain, that kind of leash. And so, you've seen sometimes there's a stick in the ground or a stake in the ground, and the dog is tied to that chain, and it can go around in a circle, but that's all the farther it can go. And the view is, well, that's kind of like Satan. He's on a chain. Now, if you stay outside of the radius of that, you're safe. If you get inside the radius of that, you get chewed up. And so that's how he is loosed and chained at the same time. He's loosed within his radius. He's chained outside of it. And so that the gospel keeps him chained, and he can't really touch those believers. And anybody that doesn't accept the gospel is within the chain, gets chewed up. Okay, so that's how that view goes anyway. So you have those particular views, and And then there's the non-theological ones, and can I throw these in now, and then you can come back and ask me a question on the other ones if you want. And that's the premillennial view and the panmillennial view. Now, those aren't theological ones. They're not in the sense that those are prevalent views that people have written about or they go to Revelation to find. But the premillennial view is, yeah, I'm for the rule of Christ. And the panmillennial view says, it's all going to pan out one way or the other. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it'll pan
out. I could get behind that one.
But ultimately, I think it comes back to the literal or the figurative part of this particular scripture. Is there a 1,000-year rule literally, or is there a 1,000-year rule metaphorically or figuratively?
And really, isn't that the challenge of Revelation being apocalyptic literature, which is literature we today, especially in the West, especially in the 21st century, we don't understand apocalyptic literature, but it was common back in John's days.
Correct.
And so that brings another layer of what's symbolic, and if it's symbolic, what does that mean? And then these numbers, what does those numbers mean? So it's very challenging. I appreciate what you said in an earlier interview about approaching Revelation with humility. So we have this millennium, 1,000 years, of whether it's 1,000 years of literal 1,000 years of Christ's reign here on earth, or whether it's a metaphoric. It's debates on either side. What are some other views in terms of, like, you get this tribulation as well going on?
Yeah, and let me, if I go back to
go ahead.
Revelation 2, it's kind of interesting is that there is actually a literal part and a figurative part to it, because you have the 7 churches that he's talking to, and that's a letter. There's a letter to them, and then he goes and gives the vision. And so there's even within Revelation a little bit of difference of genre of literature. He kind of switches a little bit. And so you have to kind of look at that and to see it. Well, the tribulation has to do with the church being persecuted. And so particularly when we look at Revelation, the view is there's a 7-year tribulation. And then the question is, well, when does Jesus come back? Is it Is it before? So you have pre-tribulation. Is it in the middle, as some would say, because of the way the text is written, about the 3.5 years and such, that'd be mid-tribulation, or is it post? That is a post-tribulation, post-trib that Christians go through. So either Christians don't go through the tribulation, through the persecution, they go through some of it, or they go through all of it. And those are those different views. And so the rapture then is traditionally, anyway, at least in the most popular ways it's interpreted now, is the rapture is that the church is taken out at each of those different points. And that's how you don't get persecuted, because you're taken out in the beginning or in the middle, or it's all going to happen at the end, and you got to go through it anyway.
So the common view would be that Jesus comes back sometime either prior to this intense tribulation of the church, or in the middle of it, or at the end of it. And then there's a 1,000-year reign, and then he comes back. Is that kind of more the popular prevailing view?
And that's more the popular. It's more of the premillennial view. And what I didn't say before, because I got too excited about talking about pro and pan millennial, I'd said that post-millennial view was very prevalent in the up to the 1800s and the 19th century. In fact, it was still even very popular in the first part of the 20th century. There was a saying in the early part of the 20th century that in every day and every way we are getting better and better. And so people thought that the 1900s coming to 2000, that there was going to be a century in which life is getting better, because it was. You had not only had the trains, but you had the airplanes and you had cars, and technology was just taking off. You had light bulbs, et cetera, et cetera. So people would say, wow, life is getting good, at least technologically, and it's getting better and better. But then World War I came and just kind of smashed that. World War II obliterated that. So in the 1840s, there started to be the premillennial started getting some popularity. And by the time the world wars happened, postmillennialism was gone, because people say, well, it's not getting better and better. The premillennial view kind of took over. And the amillennial view has always kind of been there, but was not on the popular level. So I'm talking popular. It's post-millennial to the 1840s. Then there started being a transition. And then in the 20th century, premillennial view, as you described it, has become the prevalent view.
That's fascinating that you have world event history playing into theology.
Yes.
And so in the 1840s, was it Darby and others came up with this premillennial view, and then these world wars happen, and then what we see in the 60s and 70s, right, with Hal Lindsey and the late great Planet Earth, and then the Left Behind series in the late 90s, early 2000s, whenever those came out.
Right.
That would be an example of premillennial, pre-trib eschatology. Is that
correct? That's correct. That's right.
So,
And they've been very popular. Those books have sold, millions of books and through the years.
I wish my book has sold millions of books. So what was it, would you say, about this view that has changed? Because from the early church fathers, it seemed like you're saying it was that we're not going to escape any type of tribulation, any type of persecution, but Jesus will be with us during that. But then there's a shift in the late 19th century, then 20th century, where it's about, no, the church is going to be taken away from any type of persecution. How do we deal and wrestle with that? And is that a valid viewpoint? Because there's scholars on all sides of these.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you have to come with humility.
Yeah.
Have an opinion, but I'm not going to say 100% it's right, but of course it makes sense to me. So
that's what is right? Yeah.
But part of it has to do with the tribulation. The biggest passage is 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 18. And the word what's the word I want?
Rapture.
Pardon me?
Rapture.
Rapture, thank you.
I got you.
Just in my mind. It's not a biblical term, it's a theological term. We get the rapture actually from the Latin Vulgate, because the word that is talking about snatched up in the Greek is actually the word raptured in the Latin.
It's not even in the Greek text. Rapture is in the Latin text, the Latin Vulgate that Jerome translated from Greek to Latin.
Correct. It's not in the Greek, okay? But we use that term. So it's a theological term. It's not really a biblical term, if you will, okay? So it depends how you look at 1 Thessalonians 4. It said, the Lord will come back with a shout of the command. We will meet the Lord with the air, and then we'll forever be with the Lord. Now, what people have generally viewed that as being is we meet the Lord and off we go to heaven, wherever it is. But there is another view, and that is that we would go meet the Lord and then usher him to earth. And there was a practice back in the New Testament times that when the emperor was coming to visit a town, an entourage would go out to greet that dignitary, greet the emperor, and then escort that person in a triumphal entry into the city. And so there is a strong interpretation of Scripture that said that's what that's talking about. We're going to go meet the Lord and then escort him to earth, and that's where heaven will be on earth. That's where many people have that particular view. So that means, on the one hand, if we go off to be with the Lord, you could be raptured, taken away. But the other is the believers never leave. So there's never a rapture of being taken out of the earth and out of harm's way until Jesus gets rid of all evil.
Wow. And it sounds like the beauty of these is that people could have different views on how the end time is going to come into play, but that's not a matter of fellowship, a matter of oh, I can't talk to you because you don't believe in a pre-trib rapture or post-trib or post-millennial rapture.
Yeah, exactly. Number one, we need to realize this is maybe an important issue, but it's not a salvation issue. You know, your view of the end times, pre, post, pro, pan, doesn't save you or not. If it does, we're probably all in trouble, right? Because we're probably all wrong.
Yeah, we're wrong at something, right? We can't have everything all figured out.
Yeah, exactly. Because where would faith be? We'd be just walking by sight. So we have to just trust the Lord's going to work it out however he does. That's why I like the pan-millennial, like as you were saying, because however he's going to do it, he's going to do it. It's going to work out. Though I have some views of which of the others are right, I come to it with humility. So I can't, it's not a salvation issue. Therefore, it should not be a fellowship issue either. It should be a place, as you've talked before, to say we can have dialogue. I want to listen to your view. You listen to my view. We may walk away totally disagreeing, or one of us or both of us move over a little bit from where we were. That's part of fellowship and dialogue, but it shouldn't be an issue to divide the church. And unfortunately, it has, at least in some churches and some denominations. You don't believe this, then you're not really a true Christian, whatever this is.
Yeah. And there's a lot of universities, Christian universities, where you have to sign, that statement of faith. And part of the statement of faith is what your view is on the end times.
Yeah. See, in my opinion would be that's just totally wrong, because that's
right.
It's a salvation issue.
Yeah, right. The statement of faith should be, do you believe Jesus died? Yes. Do you believe he bodily rose from the grave? Yes. Do you believe he ascended? Yes. Do you believe he's coming back? Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Now it's negotiating. Let's debate. Let's do it in love and be open-minded.
Yeah. So even though nowadays the most prevalent view and popular theology would be this dispensationalist premillennialism, historically it has been this post-millennial, post-tribulation, that we're going to go through bad stuff, and regardless if someone's in this camp or somewhere in between, all the camps believe that in the end God wins, and if God wins, we win.
Right. Exactly. Which is where we started in our very first session.
Right.
Later Revelation.
Yeah. And then it's like, that solves it. Yeah, And so I love studying Revelation, even though the more I read, the more I'm like, I don't know anything. I jokingly told, I think, my staff the other day, I told him just that. And then I said, the moral of the story is just don't read. And then I said, no, I'm just kidding. You should read every day. It's so important to read. Can you share just, I don't know, one last thought or encouragement about, engaging with these dialogues with end time discussions? How should we do it? How much should we do it? What happens if someone's so dogmatic, like this is the way you have to believe? How should we go about that?
Yeah, well, with that last part, if somebody gets too dogmatic, I think you just have to say we've got to agree to disagree and walk away from that topic, not necessarily walk away from that person, but walk away from that topic, because I don't want that to become a barrier to our fellowship. I think what you're talking about is important, because you say, well, should I even be dealing with this at all? But I think all theology is worth dealing with. And people think of theology as being ethereal and that it's not real. But I'd like to suggest that theology, and this is theology, it's a particular part of theology, but it's theology, is as practical as breathing. Everybody has a theology. Question, is it a good theology or bad theology? Is it a biblical theology, a non-biblical theology? An atheist has a theology. An atheist has a view about the God that they don't believe in.
Yeah.
So they have a theology. And so there's nothing more important than theology, because the nature of God is more important than anything, because your belief of the nature of God will determine the decisions that you make in your life.
I guess that begs the question how important it is to continue to understand, because the healthier view of God we have, I think the healthier view we're going to have on life in general.
Exactly. And it's going to take some while to figure that out. And so the discussions are worthwhile. You can't have them all the time. You don't have the time or the energy. You don't have the bandwidth, and the mind. It's tiring, to try to think all this. I think on occasion, you ought to do that. You ought to continually be thinking about deep thoughts, because life is deep and it's important. And even the stuff we're talking about from the beginning, pandemics and racial issues and fires and everything else that's going on, these are deep issues of life, and they affect us. And so our view of God will determine whether we just say, forget God or cling to God. It depends upon your theology, what you think about God, who he is. Is God just this authoritative, mean old man, or is he a loving father? It makes a difference.
And when we talk about theology, you break down the word theos is God, and ology is word. So it's literally like a word about God. So we're talking about theology, right? We're talking about kind of thoughts about God. What's a better way of explaining that?
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, theology, theos is the word for God. So people probably wonder, well, why do you call it theology? Well, because it's of the Greek terms. So you could say it's Godology. It's the
like that.
study of God. And God is so immense. How can you ever figure him out? I tell him regularly, I'm sorry that I'm so shallow, that I don't know who you are. I do know who you are. I know a number of things, but there's so much more I don't know, and that even which I know, sometimes I don't get it. Even when we talk about the cross extinguishing evil and the Jesus would become a human being, it's mind-boggling. But I think it's worth thinking about. Some people say, well, just accept it in faith, and that's great, but then how deep is that? Jesus told parables because he wanted people not just to hear a nice story, he wanted them to dig deeper. He wants dedicated followers. He wants people to think through their faith, not just be shallow.
I love that. Think through our faith and really process why we believe what we believe, and process why other people believe what they do, and really understand their point of view, whether they're believers or not believers. I think that's so important when we have a healthy understanding of other beliefs, because we genuinely care about them.
Exactly.
Wow, this is good. We could again go on and on and on, but we'll leave
exactly.
Joe, thank you so much again for joining us and encouraging us and giving us a lot to think about.
Thank you, Brian. You keep up the great work, and everyone else, God bless you, and keep on keeping on.